Francis Weller.
And I'm John Evans. More pushback tonight on several of President Donald Trump's executive orders. 27 religious groups said today they're going to sue the Trump administration over immigration enforcement.
Opposition to new tariffs on foreign metal imports and condemnation continues over the president's order to end diversity, equity, and inclusion. WECT's Ariana Bertolotti was at a press conference with people who have spent years fighting for diversity and equity. What did they tell you, Ariana?
Well, Fran, they're frustrated. They feel decades of progress was lost with the stroke of a pen, but they are ready to stand up for their rights once again.
Say it with me, we're not going back by any means necessary.
By going back, Sonia Patrick is talking about turning the clock back more than 60 years to before the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Remember, freedom is a state of the mind.
It's the law that outlawed discrimination against people of color, women, or those who practice different religions. Now, it's severely weakened following President Donald Trump's executive order that ends federal government's diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, a move local governments and businesses are also following.
Turn from their wicked ways.
That's why the NAACP, the local chapter of the National Black Leadership Caucus, and religious leaders joined in Wilmington to speak out against the order.
This is the time not to be complacent. We have to stand up.
However, supporters of the order say it's about restoring equality, not stripping away protections. Nevin Carr, chair of the New Hanover County Republican Party, gave WECT a statement on ending DEI, saying in part, quote, "DEI initiatives add zero value to the taxpayer. Merit creates value. Refocusing our national priorities on value and merit will take us to new heights and will benefit all Americans, no matter their skin color." It's clear both sides are focused on an equal playing field. However the nation achieves that is a different question. But those here know the pain of years past and remain hopeful for the future, even with the executive order.
We have lived and survived much worse.
On top of the countless lawsuits we've already seen, there has been at least one legal challenge this week to the federal government, implementing this executive order on ending DEI. That lawsuit was filed by a national diversity group that alleges the order is unconstitutional. Fran?
All right, we will have to see how that plays out in court. Thanks so much, Ariana.